I'm assuming that we're good to go. So my name is Jeremy Eves. I work with Pantonium. I take care of the sales team over here. And what we're doing at Pantonium is we're trying to take technology to solve public transit problems. And we're very clear that we believe public transit does a great job, that fixed route coverage is a necessity for moving large volumes of people, and that other innovative approaches have been tried, starting from the 60s or 70s with dial-a-ride to a variety of approaches. And technology is at a point now with all of the real-time capabilities, putting the computers in your pocket with smartphones, having the remote capability with drivers through tablets, that technology is allowing transit to go through a transformation, a technology transformation. And we're trying to lead that charge by thinking deeply about how do you solve transit problems with technology without taking transit away from the agencies, right? So give the technology to the agencies so that they can address these transit challenges without having to bring third parties in, or the necessity of a public organization coming in and taking over transit. So today, covering rural transit, which is definitely not an easy problem to solve. It's tackled, the same way. Do you target ridership, or do you target coverage? How do you get ridership? Well, I think, our core principles on ridership is if you make it flexible, convenient, and easy to access at a reasonable price, folks will rely on transit as long as it's reliable, and either forego getting a second car or first car altogether. So in rural, it's a little bit different of an equation. Targeting coverage is very challenging. Very large geographic areas. A lot of decisions have to be made about the way you can fund these types of programs. You're dealing with a very dispersed, low density population. It's very difficult to provide, effective transportation using schedules. The distance between stops or between the rural area and the nearest, developed urban or developed rural area, small town or such, can be quite far. And then you have to add stops in between. That long distance creates very expensive operations. So if you effectively think that it's around the same as operating an hour of urban transit, you're dealing with a far fewer volume of people, maybe one, maybe zero, versus at least 15 to 20 on a good fixed route per hour. But then you're dealing with a lower tax base, so can't raise property taxes for folks that are don't have access to all the varying employment options that you do in a more urban setting. So you have a lower tax base, means less funding. So now you're competing with other projects. If a sewer project has to be done, then that has to be done, and transit will have to suffer. So it's not easy to solve, and it's needed. Stats have shown that folks that live in rural areas have a much higher percentage of disability requirements. And so, what are we supposed to do to help, get those folks access to the treatments and appointments that they need to get to? So it's almost more needed than urban, but arguably needed in both places. So the trade-offs are, you create scheduled service for these rural communities, and you try and schedule it throughout the day. And the trade-off is that you have empty vehicles traveling very long distances, sometimes carrying very few or zero passengers. So in low density areas, it's very expensive and very inefficient, but it's almost necessary in the way that it is today. So a solution that we're proposing is our platform of OnDemand Macrotransit. And but Pantonium's, in general, I guess OnDemand Transit is just a technology solution that allows agencies to provide a more convenient experience without the need for fixed schedules or fixed routes. It can work in conjunction with them, and it allows agencies to operate an on-demand platform in areas that a fixed route has not been successful, or transit doesn't exist today. Covering a little bit about what I talked about last time is, there are varying on-demand approaches, but they're not equal. So ride hailing with Uber and Lyft is not the same as what the Macrotransit folks are providing. It's not the same as what we're providing. And the reason is the way that we approach the algorithm. And if you're interested in learning more about that, you can either go back to the webinar I held on February 25th, or we have an upcoming webinar in early April, where actually Kuni Feng is going to be, our CTO and co-founder, is going to actually be talking very deeply about the technical aspects of algorithms. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend staying tuned, and we'll be jumping on that as the next topic. So based on the types of algorithms that are deployed, it kind of defines what approach it has to take. And so with ride hailing, it's more like a taxi service. Macrotransit is similar to like a demand response or a specialized transit. And our approach is similar to conventional transit with the ridership numbers that you would expect from a highly productive fixed route. And we talk about productivity, we talk about rides per vehicle service hour. Not rides per service hour, per vehicle service hour. How effective are the vehicles that are deployed? How effective are they being utilized every hour of the day? And there's different approaches, and I've got some application data here. So if you're interested in learning more about that, that was covered pretty in depth on February 25th. But the same barriers to ridership adoption apply. And so if you deploy an on-demand solution anywhere and there are barriers to ridership, you're going to have fewer riders. That's just the reality of it. And so what we've tried to do is try and minimize those barriers by using a highly efficient algorithm that can handle disruptions and last minute changes. So that it is the most available and flexible platform for the riders to plan their trips around. And so when you think about barriers, one barrier to transit in general is transfers. And so if in a city you have to go, it's a hub and spoke model or flower petal or however you want to describe it, you go out to one region, you get picked up, you have to take them back to the transit station or the central station and jump on the next bus to take you out to the other side of the city. So most fixed route services are designed to have transfers. In our on-demand deployments, we don't really want transfers unless it's absolutely necessary. And that's usually if you're crossing municipal boundaries, typically. We try and keep the service areas as large as possible to minimize that transfer and get the transfer penalty. In microtransit, it's kind of the nature of the beast. It's designed for small service areas, more like a first mile, last mile type of approach, and a lot smaller vehicles in small zones. There's ad hoc rider boarding, which means that if you haven't booked a trip and you need to get a ride, you can still just go onto a bus and ask for a trip and tell the driver your destination. We're the only platform that can do that at this point that I'm aware of, without dramatically affecting the optimization algorithm. We actually allow riders to choose their drop-off time. And for rural transit, I think it's really important. And so I'll cover that a little bit more in detail further on. Fixed stops is kind of a hybrid approach to acknowledging that folks like schedules. And so if you can pick some key areas within the deployment area where you still want to have some sort of a timetable, you can allow for fixed stops, which ends up, if you string a bunch of fixed stops together, it actually creates a deviated route in a way. And so what you can do is you can still keep it accessible to folks that don't like to use technology and maybe they don't feel comfortable calling in to make an appointment. You can still have some times available that people can still get on and do an ad hoc trip with Pantonium. No other platform allows you to do that. Service connections. So if you want to transfer from one service type to another, whether it's one on-demand system to another on-demand system or an on-demand system to a fixed route system service, we attempt as best as possible to do coordination, meaning that we're not letting the rider have to plan their day. So if they want to transfer to a fixed route system from an on-demand service, we're going to look for the GTFS files or some sort of static schedule so that the rider can pick the vehicle time that they want to transfer to. And our system will go backwards and say, okay, well, if you want to get to that stop at that time, then we need to pick you up at this particular time, right? So they're fixing the destination time, and then we give them the pickup time. That's very different than connecting versus coordination. Booking periods. So we allow folks to book anytime they want, whether it's real time, 5 days ahead of time, 3 days ahead of time. It's up to the rider to pick when they want to schedule their ride. Other microtransit solutions have limitations on that booking period, typically within 1 hour. Sometimes it's within 24 hours. But then another key question is, what's the cancellation period? And we allow cancellations anytime without negatively affecting our algorithm. We've seen some indications that there are cancellation restrictions for some of the microtransit folks, so something to keep in mind. And then everyone has apps, so iOS and Android, but we also offer web browser booking, and it's not typical in the microtransit world. We're seeing a couple more that I think have added it, but something to keep in mind that browsers don't require you to download an app. Every phone comes with the browser. And so our platform works almost as well in the browser as it does in the app. And some of our deployments, if they push that, still the majority of riders are booking using a browser because, they have limited data plans, et cetera. So it's something to keep in mind about, barriers to ridership. 30% of folks typically don't even have a smartphone. So 30% of folks that ride transit don't typically have a smartphone. And if they do, they may not have a data plan that can accommodate using for on-demand trip booking. So I'm going to skip through a couple of things, but I wanted to just bring up, I just wanted to share some simulation data. I'm pretty excited about this because we didn't have a good handle on what loaded performance can look like, just because rider volumes are down across the board. And so what we did is we ran through a series of simulations using an area that's about 30 square kilometers, 300 stops that were available. And we used origin destination trip pairings that are from an existing deployment. So when you hold the vehicle count constant and increase the trips per hour inputs, you can actually get a sense of what the loading impact is on the algorithm. And so these are all single passenger trips. There are no guests in this. And so I want to share that what we're seeing is, our system can handle in an ideal scenario up to 23 RSH, and so these are full-size buses running across this geography, using these stops that we've allocated and running in an on-demand fashion for that whole period. If you get to about 2023 RSH, that's where we start seeing, excessively late pickup times, so there's some time violations there. But getting to 2023 in an on-demand fashion is pretty powerful. And you can see that what the average wait time and ride times were, for that. And then as you increase the number of vehicles, we still can do 100 trips with 4 vehicles. You get to about 22 RSH with the associated ride time and wait time. So this is the performance characteristics that we're looking at, that we're trying to optimize our algorithms around, so that it is almost a continuous optimization platform that generates the performance that if under load, if there's a lot of demand and you can't throw additional vehicles out there, we're just showing that the system can handle that type of volume, without breaking down. And I think that's incredibly interesting and something I'm looking forward to diving more into. One thing that we did was we ran one scenario, more of a microtransit style. So we instead of a full-size bus, we put out 7-passenger vans, and we said let's lose up to 15 vans just to see what would happen. And we ended up only using 4 vehicles and still hitting 16 RSH for a microtransit style deployment. So I think it's really interesting when you start comparing deployment styles with others, and what we're achieving, 16 RSH, where others are still hitting the 5 or 6 mark. Okay, so diving into regional transportation, I want to use an example of someone local to us, where it's just outside of a current customer. So Stratford is using the city of Stratford's using an our on-demand platform for Saturday and Sunday service. And so I thought, well, why not use their example of rural transportation around them, because folks in Perth County are local to Stratford, and sometimes they need to get down to London. That's where the central healthcare facility is for folks in the area. So just really quickly, Perth County is 841 square miles, with a population of about 38,000 people, not including the folks in Stratford. So that's just the Perth County itself. One of the towns in Perth County is Listowel, and so I want to just do a quick check on how far away that is. If you took if you use Google for navigation guidance, and Listowel to London is about 100 kilometers or 60 miles, and it takes about an hour and 18 minutes. And Listowel to Stratford is about 54 kilometers, and that should take about 42 minutes. So having a vehicle you could get to Stratford in 42 minutes, and getting to London, you could get there in about hour 18 minutes. So let's just keep that in mind. So Perth County did roll out a regional transportation called PC Connect for Perth County, which covers Stratford and St. Mary's. I didn't include the St. Mary's conversation here, but you can see it's located in Route B. Route A is the northerly section of the route, and Route B is the southerly section of the route. And then the blue line is Route 3, which covers kind of from Stratford to London. And it goes through St. Mary's to get there. So just keep this in mind. This is what a regional transportation system looks like. You have stops in kind of some key areas of the more developed urban areas of the region. And so let's just take a look at a couple of scenarios. So, Anne lives in Listowel, and she has to go to Stratford and doesn't have a vehicle available to her, and she has to bring her son to a medical appointment. And so she's looking at the schedule for Route A for Perth County, and she'll have to board up at the public library in the Listowel branch. She's not going to go to the Listowel Technology. That's an industrial business. So we're going to go to the public library at the Listowel branch, and that's how we're going to connect up to get down to Stratford. So her appointment's at 1:45 on a Thursday. So we're going to use the Monday to Saturday schedule. She has to. So if we look at the schedule, so the first column is the start at the terminal, and then it goes down to the Stratford terminal back at 8:15. And so then it leaves there at 8:15 and goes up to North Listowel Public Library at 9:18. But her appointment's at 1:45, but there's a break in the middle of the day. So she's gonna have to take the earlier trip. There's no options that would get her to Stratford on time in the afternoon. So 9:18, she has to get to the left. She has to get there just before then to get on that connector bus. And then that'll get her down to the terminal at 10:28. So then she's gonna have to wait a few hours to take the local bus to the doctor's office. So let's say her appointment finishes around 2:10, just a 15-minute appointment. And then she has to look at the schedule again. It goes, okay, well, the bus leaves Stratford at 3:15 and gets back to Listowel at 4:18. And then she has to arrange for a ride back to her house. So this is essentially a full day for what it amounts to about a 15 to 20-minute doctor appointment. And that is the reality for a good portion of the folks that rely on public transit. Now, if you were to use a technology-centered approach, using a Macrotransit solution like ours, what would end up happening is there are multiple ways that she could book. So let's say that she actually is comfortable using technology. And so she's going to open up the OnDemand Transit app, and she'll select her origin and her destination. So at the origin can be an address, it can be a designated stop, or the destination could be an address or a designated stop. And so you can have curb to stop or stop to curb, however you want to structure it. And so let's just assume that she has to get to the library. Let's say we'll use a stop-based strategy here, but you could also do curb-based here. So she will get the origin as the library and the destination as the Stratford bus terminal. She selects a drop-off appointment at the doctor. She sets the drop-off appointment as at the doctor's office. So she sets that drop-off time for 1:25. That way she can get there, and then she will get to the transfer point at 1:25. So our algorithm will go, okay, you want to get there at 1:25. Here's an ETA for when a vehicle is going to pick you up to take you into Stratford. The way that we do that is there's constraints. So you set a max ride time and a max wait time. Given the rural setting, you probably widen those up quite a bit wider than you would in an urban environment. So it looks like from Stratford Terminal to Listowel is about 42. No, how many minutes was that on the schedule? 6 to 7:10. So it's about an hour and 10 minutes. So you'd probably want to set like a max ride time potentially at an hour and 20 or an hour and 30 minutes, and a max wait time, within a certain constraint, maybe call it half an hour or something like that. all that does is it gives the system flexibility in creating options if options are necessary. If there's no real demand, then it effectively will act as a taxi service, and it will bypass the stops that are not necessary. And so you'll have more flexibility in the way that the drivers will be allocated their stop times. I'll talk a little bit about how to maintain some form of schedules a little bit later. So let's move back to Anne. So 15 minutes before her pickup, she receives a reminder that the vehicle's on its way to come and get her. So make sure she's at the library at a particular time. There's only one other person on the vehicle, so she got picked up at 12:25, and it took about an hour to get down to the Stratford terminal when the other person had to get dropped off along the way. And then she takes a local bus to the appointment and arrives on time. And so this experience was picked up at 12:25 and got to her doctor's appointment. So it took about twice as long to get there as it would with a car. The way home would be very similar. You could just create a appointment, drop-off appointment to get back to the Listowel location, and the vans would then reorganize and make sure that she got back on time. Scenario 2 would be more rural to urban. So Jamila needs to go to University Hospital in London to take for a medical appointment, but he lives in Listowel. So in order to get to London, he has to take Route A to Stratford and then transfer to Route 3 to go to London. So if we go back to the Route A timing, his appointment's at 11. So I'll go back to Route A. Route A timing from Listowel. Yeah, so he's going to have trouble getting to, here we go. So if you look at the time that he has to get from the Stratford terminal to get to London by 11, there isn't actually a good time where he could get to the Stratford terminal and get to his appointment on time, because the Stratford terminal, they leave at 7:15, or so you get there at 7:00. Yeah. So he actually should have looked at his schedules ahead of time, because there's no way that he could actually get to the Stratford terminal in time to get to London by 11 a.m. And so he actually had to call in and reschedule his appointment. Using an on-demand solution, he could call a dispatch number the day before, and the office explains it needs to get to University Hospital by 11. The dispatcher will select a drop-off time of 11 a.m. at University Hospital and the origin location, either an address or a stop. And the algorithm would have access to the Route 3 times. So it would know when the bus is going to be leaving Stratford to get to London. And then he would also have access to the London Transit GTFS schedules as well. And so by going backwards and saying, okay, if I have to get there by 11, you have to connect to the London Transit at this time, and you have to connect to Stratford at this time to get to London. We're gonna have to pick you up at, say 7:15 in order to get you to London at 11 o'clock. And so, factoring again, max ride time and wait time, he will get to Stratford via the bus, transfer to the London scheduled route, and then gets to the transfer point to take local transit to the hospital. And while he was on the phone, the agent asked him if he wanted to book his return trip, and that originated at the hospital, and he has to get coordination all the way back to Stratford and then back to Listowel. And so it's all coordinated for him, and those trip schedules or those trip transfers would be kind of identified for him, in the app. So instead of having to know the schedules yourself and try and pre-plan these things in advance, it makes this process quite seamless from a rider's perspective. So what capabilities allow for these types of rider experiences? Well, first of all, it's coordination. So I've talked about this, but it's the ability for the algorithm to look at schedules in other systems and allow for the drop-off time to reflect or be coordinated with the bus schedules for when the driver's going to be transferred from on-demand to a fixed service. You can also do coordination between two on-demand services as well, and that becomes more of a I'm going to be dropping this rider off at 7:15, and the other service would understand that and come along and collect that person either be there just before 7:15 or pick them up somewhere within a tolerance window of that, but that would be a configurable setting for the agency to determine. And so it nicely transitions them from one service to another. You could go on demand and take away the fixed routing for a service like this, but you'd want to keep some form of schedule so folks could still engage with the system without having to use technology or phones. And so one way of doing that is to pick your most popular destinations, or the ones that the drivers know folks are always kind of getting on or off at a particular time. And you could keep those fixed times as fixed stops, but then allow the system to run free flowing on demand for the rest of the time. And so it would still be a similar experience for those folks that you don't want to leave behind, but it would still combine the best of both worlds. Where when they're not being used at a fixed time at a stop, it could still be free flowing either to do curb pickup or other stop pickups based on appointment times. In conjunction with fixed stops is ad hoc boarding. So it allows someone that doesn't even have technology, isn't even aware of the service, to board a bus and just tell the driver their destination. And the system will re-optimize to make sure that it's still the best way to deliver that service. And that may require some future rider who was going to be picked up by this vehicle will now get moved to a different vehicle, right? And so behind the scenes, the riders don't see any of this happening. But from our perspective, we're re-optimizing every 200-300 milliseconds, and so it's not like a traditional software planner where it runs and it generates a plan and it pushes it out. This is always reevaluating. It's constantly looking for better options. Even if a trip is already in progress, it's still looking for better options for the future. So it's self-healing is a good way to describe it. Auto recovery is another way. So it doesn't get messed up with cancellations or no-shows. It's still very flexible from that perspective. Because of the distances between point to point or the potential distance between point to point, there is a potential that a rider could cancel. So a vehicle is already on the way to go pick up a rider. We don't want the driver interacting with the tablet while they're en route. And so if the trip is excessively long or seems excessively long, and that's based on some parameters that they can set behind the scenes, natural hubs or waypoints will be added so that the driver can come to a stop and receive any updates. This is not a long stop. It is just a functional stop along the way. And that way, if you insert these waypoints in, you could potentially collect other riders that might be looking for a trip that are going in that direction, or it will allow for the system to redirect a driver in the case that the person that they were going to pick up had decided to cancel at the last minute without incurring huge optimization penalties. This long neck stop feature is actually patent pending for Pantonium. So thinking a little bit more about Perth County, you've already got 2 vehicles for Route A and B. They're already circulating. They're going around their respective routes 4 times a day, and probably deadheading a good portion of that, or just servicing a few riders. That's typical of these rural services. So why not allow for an on-demand type of solution in a situation like this, right? You can keep all the existing stops, so riders could still select from the stop list, or you could allow for curb pickups for areas outside of the zones that have these stops in them. A stop really is just an address. It's not anything that's sacrosanct. It's just an address that's been picked on a map. If only one person is going to that stop in the morning, why not just go to their house and pick them up, right? And so when riders do start picking up on the service and it does start getting busier, you could determine if a stop is then necessary. Instead of driving around all of Listowel to pick people up at their door, you could force them to congregate at set stops, and all of this could be designed based on the ridership patterns that you're collecting through the software. Multi-loading at the beginning is probably unlikely. So it's probably best just to start with curb to curb type of service. And then, like I said before, if a driver or the planner already knows that ridership is consolidated at a certain location at a certain time, then keep that as a fixed stop, and that way those folks know that the vehicle is still going to be coming there at a certain time of day. Found that to be very important for certain rider demographics. So how does this feed into a one click, one call type of coordinated model? Well, the example I just showed you was, municipal, was actually a regional transit agency offering service or rural service to help folks get from rural areas to, developed rural or other urban locations. But typically in a rural format, you have others offering services as well. You have private organizations, you have volunteer organizations, community agencies, healthcare agencies, nursing, home care and nursing type of services. And you have municipal transit that might border, or reside within the county itself. And so the one click, one call model is designed so that it's easy for the rider and it's easy for the organizations to operate their transit system. It takes the trip planning and designation out of the hands of each individual organization. So you can combine forces and combine funding to maximize benefit, which is the objective obviously is to provide as many rides to as many people as possible at an efficient cost. And so, the idea would be you have one phone number, one call, and one web interface, one click, and this is obviously this has not been done in an on-demand fashion before. There have been some one click, one call type of services, but it's really like a clearinghouse of trip management. And it's definitely not done in an on-demand fashion. It requires, a team of dispatchers to make it all work. And so the goal of on-demand transit is that you have a central kind of hub, which is the software for trip allocation. And then if everybody that's in this Venn diagram is using the same platform or has the ability to coordinate with it, then you're creating a very strong user experience that folks will rely on, and it will help bring people to take the transit and pay their $10 or $20 because these systems are heavily government funded. Cost recovery factor is minimal or nominal at most. So it's important when you're looking at something like this, you do a very deep review of the technical capabilities. I've tried to identify the key technical components that you would want to look at and for a well-managed platform that a lot of people can rely on. You'd have to get agreement that the agencies, everybody involved is going to use the same platform. If you have to download flat files or have web APIs to try and push it out, you lose the efficiency. I mean, it's possible. You can, maybe two agencies want to band together and the other ones don't. But, ultimately the goal, or the best case scenario is that everybody is using, that one platform as a clearinghouse. The municipal transits don't necessarily have to use on demand if they don't want to, but if they wanted to take part in it, they could use it for underperforming fixed routes during certain periods of time, which we've seen weekends and evenings be very, very popular. And to be clear, the whole vision of this is our 2022 vision for regional transit and one click, one call. But major parts of this can already be accomplished today by the current platform. But we're not, I know that things in transit take time. And so in getting to this type of a coordinated strategy is quite challenging. A lot of folks take pride in regional transit or in their local transit agencies, and we fully understand that. But from a efficiency and rider experience perspective, this is probably the way to go. Just a quick example of another just kind of transferring between counties, what that looks like. And so say someone wants to go from county A, city 1 in county A to city 2 in county B. You can't have vehicles running all over county A and B. If they wanted to, you could, but in a lot of cases they're constrained by, the county boundaries. And so you'd set up like on-demand transfer points. And it's kind of like I talked about with coordination, the traveler would book their trip from address to address, and then the system would then create the trip plan for them. And so they could go from the city one, get picked up at their home or at a designated stop, travel to wherever the system routed them to the most efficient transfer point. And you can have multiple transfer points depending on how long the connecting line is between the counties. But you'd want to use it on either a very convenient and safe place to do that transfer. And so that's set up by the agency, and it can be modified as well. And so when the system drops the rider at the transfer point, it already has a vehicle allocated to come and collect them, so they're not waiting too long to get to City 2. It's very similar to having your own vehicle, just with some multi-loading required and sharing costs with others. But it's still a very convenient and effective way to travel these long distances, especially for those that depend on transit. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about from a regional transit perspective, and from a one-click, one-call vision. And really quickly, we've been deploying in lots of different types of environments. So whether it's urban geography, urban cities, to we have done regional transportation here in Ontario for Deseronto Transit that's currently on hold for COVID-19. But we've got different types of deployments, and every month we're seeing new inquiries, new use cases, new data points that we're always sharing. So that's why I like to host these webinars, to keep people up to date and keep folks engaged in what we're trying to achieve here, which is ultimately improving the quality of life for everyone in cities, rural and beyond. So appreciate everyone taking time to spend with me today, and I'll start digging into some of the questions. Okay. Does the coordination aspect of Pantonium's algorithm account for local traffic conditions when calculating when a rider should be picked up? So it's a good question. What we do is that our map layer data does not take real-time traffic into account. We just look at what the average speeds have been for that particular area. In a rural setting, I would be surprised if traffic caused a major concern, unless there was a major road construction, which part of our goal would be to implement some sort of a way of capturing any construction data that has been maybe logged in a central clearing database. But right now, and we haven't had any issues with this, but we don't use live traffic data. Where is the data from about the percentage of riders that have a smartphone? Well, we've got a couple of places. We've looked at rider surveys in other geographies that, whether they had, in one of our deployments actually in Sioux Falls, they had a rider survey that talked about the percentage of people without a smartphone, and they referenced 30%. I know that has been correlated with other rider surveys that are out there. I don't have those at hand, but we look at rider survey data to get that type of information. Okay. For people without smartphones, they need to call someone to handle booking. How is this function serviced outside of standard business hours? Well, that would be up to the agency on how to fund that. You could either contract with a call center with access that has a call center privileges with the platform. And so most call centers that I've dealt with in the past, you train the call center technicians, whether it's a grouping of them or however they want to divide it up, and you give them a access to the booking screens for folks that want to book trips. That's one way of doing it. Another way is that you could have a lead agency decide that they're going to take on all of the dispatch call-ins requests. And that way they could staff up and train the folks themselves, and provide them office space and things like that. In a one-click, one-call scenario, folks, what I've read and seen is that they do pool resources. And so one lead agency will take responsibility typically the largest one, to offer the coordination and call-in services on behalf of the whole consortium. So with people, but in general, for on-demand transit, for people without smartphones, they would just have to call during business hours and schedule a trip in advance. So they could call at 1 o'clock for a 6 p.m. Trip request. But you're probably thinking that yes, they do lose access to trip status from that perspective. Has this platform been used for any school bus optimization? The answer is no. School bus optimization is a very different type of problem. Not saying that it couldn't be accommodated in on-demand, but it would require, school buses typically follow more of a fixed route scenario, less, maybe sometimes a deviated route if kids are canceling. And so the application for on-demand has not yet been asked, but happy to entertain a conversation on that to learn more about any requirements that you might have. Brandon, on that one? Have you used 211 or 311 in any of the communities? And the answer is no. The services that we're providing are typically, they're answered by the dispatch office for transit agencies. I'm interested to learn more about how that could be integrated. In Chatham, any call-ins are handled right now by the transit agencies, Karen. So, I'd like to learn more about how we could integrate that with any 211 and 311 if that was possible. And we have another comment about one of our customers that uses another platform that we have. Drivers, yeah, definitely there's a learning curve. So not only in public transit where we're deploying, not only are our drivers used to running on fixed schedules, it's definitely something that takes them time to learn how to use the technology, to trust the technology, and to also integrate it to their process. And so training the drivers is actually probably one of the most it takes up the most time, in the training process. We tend to use a train the trainer approach. So we have fairly in-depth training. We have 5 different sessions when an agency comes on board, and we'll take different people through the different sessions depending on their role in the organization. From a driver training perspective, we actually have a video that you can circulate with the drivers. We have a training platform that the agency can practice on instead of using production. And so we encourage a lot of engagement early on with the drivers, getting driver team leads, driver supervisors involved, getting them playing around with the technology. This is not a high cost type of tablet that they're using. So you can get those in advance, tie them into the training platform and get them to try it out. In some deployments, we've actually seen the use of a buddy system. So you have 2 drivers on the vehicle and they switch roles every hour, where one is just driving and not worrying about the tablet, and the other one is using the tablet and telling the driver where to go. And then they switch that up, and then then the guy that was using the tablet is now familiar with the tablet, so he's driving and he's kind of watching the tablet. Now, just to be clear, we're not doing anything. There's nothing that's required while the driver is in motion, right? So it's just when they get to a stop. But it's just that extra stress of having to learn those things, and it takes a bit of time for them to get to it. Like anything, when you're training people, you get a percentage of people that pick it up really quick, get the people in the middle that eventually get it fairly quickly, and then you have the folks that just aren't comfortable with the change, and it takes a bit of time to come on board. But the overall benefit, and we've seen this from deployment to deployment, is that they see that it does bring people to transit, and that in some instances has actually created more jobs, which folks are interested in. And if you offer that type of a service, they see that ridership is appreciating the change. And so, when you combine all those things together, it does end up turning out to be a positive experience. So Rachel, I think I just answered your question about training agencies adapting or piloting the software. We do have a very in-depth training process. Not only that, when we've done training, we don't pick up and leave. You have our phone numbers, and we can answer a lot of questions that you have fairly quickly. What we see is, in the first month or so, quite a few questions pop up as you're reinforcing the training and the learning and getting the software familiar with everybody. And then after that, the number of calls that come in kind of trickle down and are just reserved for, weird scenarios or things that were unexpected. Okay, I don't see a ton of other questions out there. Oh, I think we do have one other question in the chat. Do we have any experience in multi-jurisdictional deployments across Canada? Yeah, we have that one up in kind of mid-Ontario. And, from lessons learned, I'd have to go back and think about that a little bit. It was a training, there were some training questions for both drivers and dispatchers. There were, questions from the ridership about how it worked, but I know that it did help solve the kind of the deviated routing problems that would occur periodically, in manual scheduling. We've talked about in the past about how challenging it is for a human to go through all the trip requests, the vehicle allocations and scheduling and trying to make that all work together. What our software does, it takes all that demand out of the hands of dispatch so they can focus on, meeting the requests of the ridership and providing great customer service. And so that would be a good lesson learned is that, education is always the key thing in these deployments. Don't just tell people what they have to do, teach them why they're doing it. And then they become champions of the platform and understand what it can actually do. And when we have that approach, things work out very well in the end, and services start to expand, and we start seeing the growth that we would expect, from an on-demand transit change. Okay, folks, I think that is it for questions. Are there any risk-reward sharing solutions that a community can enter into with Pantonium? I'd have to learn more about what you're asking. So I'm going to share my screen so you have my email, and that way, if you want to email me, you can definitely do that. Just feel free to contact me at this email address here. jeremy.eves@pantonium.com. We have another question. Is it possible to use the tool to create a circulator of sorts? Yeah, I mean, that would be the use of fixed stops. And so you kind of pick quadrants where you'd like the vehicle to kind of circulate through, and you don't take up all of its time, driving time, stop time, with that circulator. You would allow for time in between, and that would create a circulator where it could then deviate within a certain geofence of sorts to go and collect people along the way. Creating a circulator is a little bit more control than you might want to do with an on-demand platform. What we found works better is creating the area within which folks can request trips, whether it's origin or destination, and truly letting the algorithm handle the optimization for that. But we understand that for folks that like schedules, you have to kind of find that balance. So a circulator might be the right way to do that, to create a deviated route for rural situations. And so I would say, yes, it's definitely possible. Okay, any more questions? Yeah, so Mark is just adding on to his question. That question is about a feeder to a commuter route. So yes, it could work in a similar fashion. Or you could just set a geo boundary and let the platform optimize based on rider requests. And so you wouldn't need to create a circulator, because if you have two vehicles out there, it would self-optimize and maybe create a better plan than the circulator would have forced it to do in the first place. But the good thing about on-demand software is that you can test it out, right? You can try out scenarios and see what the impacts are. We do that quite a bit. You test out, if you want to adjust wait times and ride time thresholds, you can do that and see what the impact is. And sometimes you have to do that if you have a bit of a restriction on vehicle supply. Just got to give more time for the optimization to allow between trip pickups and travel times. Or if you have enough vehicles out there, you can really tighten it up and really impact the rider experience that way. So lots of flexibility, lots of ways that you can change parameters to try out different scenarios. And actually, in fact, based on all the data that was collected in our first deployment in Belleville, they actually went from underperforming fixed route evening service to running all evening on demand, adding more vehicles, adding a lot of riders came back to the service. And then during COVID, they shut down all their fixed routes and went fully on demand for a couple of months to help minimize the operational impact for ridership declines. And then when they launched the service, the night service back again in the fall, actually it was in August of last year, they used the on-demand data, the origin destination pairs, for the most popular requests to create two fixed routes. And so what ended up happening is we went from a fixed route system to an on-demand system to back to a hybrid system, which is using coordination for folks to go from on-demand to fixed route. And one of the things that we're seeing right now is that folks are keenly interested in what to do about getting folks to vaccination appointments. And a on-demand platform is probably the easiest thing to put in place to create the best value for that investment. And in Canada, and I believe in the US, but in Canada in particular, there's funding available as part of the COVID relief package that 50% of transit project would be covered by that federal money. And that is covering like the upfront capital costs. And that would be a great use of that restart funding to help get folks to these vaccination appointments. So something to think about when you're looking at on demand. If you want to try it out and you want to see what the impact is, this would be a low risk. Well, I'm not saying it's low risk, but nothing's completely low risk, but it would be a way of putting something in place that didn't affect your existing transit platform, and you could use and test it out for vaccine appointments. All right, folks. I appreciate you hanging in there with me, and stay tuned for the next conversation. Like I said, it's going to be about a deep dive into people transportation algorithms. If you're interested in how those things work, join me as I have a conversation with our Chief Technology Officer and co-founder, Kuni Feng. Stay tuned for dates and times, and we'll make sure you get there. Otherwise, have a great rest of the day, and good luck with all your transit planning. Oh, and happy transit driver, worker, operator day. A lot of folks had a very challenging year on the front lines, big year for everybody. And it's good to see that nothing, no one was left behind. Services still were operating, and we do really appreciate that. From our position of being a vendor to transit, we understand how important it is, and thank you for taking part and being there every day to get people, keep those cities moving, keep the essential workers moving. So take the day to celebrate. Hopefully you guys can celebrate after hours today. All right, other than that, folks, take care, have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to you soon.